So welcome to the HKS Energy Policy Seminar. I'm Joe Aldy, and I'm pleased to host today's talk. As usual, we are meeting in a hybrid format. So thanks for everybody for joining us here in the room, and thanks to all of our friends and colleagues joining us online. We're thrilled to have with us today Holmes Hummel and Tamara Jones for their talk, Inclusive Financial Solutions for Faster Energy Transitions. Dr. Hummel is the co-executive director of Clean Energy Works, a public interest organization that accelerates adoption of inclusive financial solutions for essential clean energy upgrades. They are also the managing director at Stanford's Precourt Institute for Energy. Dr. Hummel served as a senior policy advisor in the Department of Energy's Office of Policy and International Affairs over 2009 to 2013. They also served as a Congressional Science Fellow for then Representative Jay Inslee in the U.S. House of Representatives. And joining us via Zoom is Tamara Jones, who is the co-executive director of Clean Energy Works. She has served as the Director of Programs and Policy for mayoral administrations in Atlanta and Houston, and as Chief of Staff to a Houston City Council member. Ms. Jones held positions of Director of Program Development and Government Relations at South Face Energy Institute. She also served as Director of Programs and Services for the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, where she administered regional energy efficiency building retrofit programs, for which she was designated a White House Champion of Change in 2011. So we'll have a tag team here in the room and via Zoom, and then after the presentation, we'll be opening up for questions. Holmes and Tamara, welcome to the Energy Policy Seminar.
Thank you, Joe. And thanks to all of you for taking some time. I see faculty members and graduate students. I want to ask for a quick show of hands. How many people are from outside the United States? If your frame of reference for energy and governance, raise your hands. Hi, hi, hi. So, wow. So tomorrow, about half of the people in the room here are from outside the United States and have a different frame of reference, perhaps, on some of the concepts that we'll be exploring. But I think you will find them resonant, as I have in conversations with people from around the world. And with that, I want to acknowledge that one of my first occasions to meet Professor Joe Aldy was when we served together in the Obama administration. And it's really a privilege to be invited back to your company. During that time, the Obama administration was focused on overturning the prior disposition of the United States with regard to international climate negotiations around the world. And in Copenhagen, we set the course of the negotiations on track for what eventually became the Paris Agreement. And in that re-rigging of the framework, there became a serious accountability question for domestic policymakers. Would we actually be able to keep our promises to the world? What would be the integrity of a pledge to decarbonize the US economy if there wasn't a credible plan to reach 100% of the households in the United States with that result? What would it mean to try to aim for 100% decarbonization, knowing full well that we only had policies that could reach less than half of the electorate? Those are serious and even arresting questions, and they drove me to pursue that unfinished business after I left my post at the Department of Energy, as Joe described. And those quests to examine the underpinning barriers to participation and to expand the clean energy economy on inclusive terms is what brought me to the work that I do with Tamara Jones and our team at Clean Energy Works. It is an honor every day to work with Tamara Jones. And together we work with a team of about a dozen people to accelerate investment on inclusive terms in a clean energy economy so that the transition is faster. That is what brings us to the intersections of a just transition, as well as the concepts of economic efficiency that have driven the policy strategies for transition thus far. So I want to, before we go further into visual aids and discussion, to put a pin at this intersection between public policy about economics and political economy, which is different. What does it mean for us to focus on optimizing for the marginal cost of millions of tons of carbon dioxide abatement, if the result is inattention to millions of people who are the body politic that have to be able to support the entire platform of policies as they are continuously attacked by opposition. That difference between public policy for economics and political economy gives us a new perspective on what it might mean to center equity and just transitions as the most assured and fastest path to the policy objectives of a carbon-free economy. Have I provoked you to be interested in what we'll say next? Lots of nods here. I see Tamara smiling. Well, with no further ado, I want to send our opening remarks to Tamara, who will help us frame that problem in a more graphic way using the United States, as I mentioned before. But I want you, especially those of you with international experience and ambitions, to take what Tamara is describing to you and test yourself. Is this really that different from the places where I'm from or the places I want to go? I think you'll find that many of the concepts are transferable, and we look forward to hearing about how you imagine that to be so. Tamara, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. And to just pick up on Joe's introduction, for the past 30 years, I've worked to advance social and climate justice initiatives in local government, community, and the nonprofit sectors. And during the Obama administration's American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, I did serve at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, a regional nonprofit, where I managed to oversee a program driving clean energy upgrades across 16 cities in the Southeast. So we were able to treat those programs as laboratories to test different approaches, catalyzing and scaling the sector. And it really challenged a lot of our working assumptions. We had a vision and we had a plan, but as Mike Tyson reminds us, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And we learned some hard lessons under ARA, including the fact that it is very difficult to keep money flowing into the places that need them most, where they have been the least amount of investments historically, places where energy savings upgrades can deliver the most relief and the best opportunities for driving down carbon. What we learned is that despite our best intentions, we kept falling short of equitable outcomes. We encountered equity issues at every level: loan uptake, workforce training and hiring, marketing and consumer education, building qualification. And those challenges persist today. So it's become increasingly clear that we need to infuse this work of bringing about a clean energy transition with a robust understanding of equity. So I want to begin by sharing the equity framework that informs our approach at Clean Energy Works, and that I hope will provoke reflections and questions about how best to realize not simply a clean energy economy, but an equitable and just clean energy economy. The framework is based on 5 dimensions: recognition, procedural, distributive, restorative, and transformative. Recognition equity asks, how did we get here? What past policies and practices produce the problems that we're now looking to rectify? We have to be rigorously honest about how our organizations, regulatory agencies, and utilities are positioned in that historical narrative. They do not stand outside of the problem. And let me pause here. Holmes, are the definitions showing on screen? There we go. Thank you so much.
Oh, excuse me. Yes.
Procedural equity looks at the decision-making process, not only who has a voice, but who has decision-making power? Do those who are most directly impacted have a meaningful role in, say, in policy and program outcomes? Distributive equity looks at how the benefits and burdens of the energy system are represented across communities. So what steps are being taken to ensure equitable access and affordability for everyone? And how do we measure the social, economic, and health outcomes in different communities? Are resources being allocated in a way that prioritizes the communities traditionally burdened by the energy system? Restorative equity considers how the solutions that are being offered actually remediate the harms. So how do we use the knowledge gained from recognition equity analysis to inform policies and programs so that they actually respond to both present and historical harms? And lastly, transformative equity pushes us to eliminate the causes and conditions that make this work necessary in the first place. What do we need to change in our existing structures, policies, and practices so that this is not repeated? So our contention at Clean Energy Works is that strategies based on this robust equity framework offers the fastest way to make a clean energy transition possible, because truly equitable policies open systemic pathways that benefit everyone. So equity needs to be understood and seen as a powerful accelerant to the transition. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. So how do we understand the problem? What's needed? 100% transition requires 100% participation, but we're not seeing energy upgrades at scale in the residential market. So historically, we're averaging less than 200,000 residential upgrades annually in the largest federally funded efficiency program. Even when you account for private spending, that figure only doubles. It's still way too low. So to reach our 2050 national commitments, we need to be upgrading over 5 million homes annually with both efficiency and electrification technologies. Even the DOE concedes that the work is painfully slow. At this rate, it will take us 200 years to decarbonize the residential building sector. Just to get heat pumps into American homes against the 2050 timeline, we need to be installing 10 times faster than we currently are and keep up that pace for 20 years. To reach the 2050 national goal requires that we're investing $120 billion annually, not with an M, with a B. And the overall cost to fully electrify the residential building stock is more than $3 trillion. But we know that we don't have the political backing for the funding, the public funding that is needed to cover these kinds of crucial upgrades, not even for the homes that qualify by income. So the current pace is not only too slow, the uptake is skewed. The high initial costs of making upgrades, coupled with conflicts in the market, like what we see between renters and landlords, have led to a situation where energy upgrades seem to favor wealthier homeowners. But honestly, not even enough of them are getting involved. So we're left with the contradiction, where on the one hand, we've got national leaders promising a 100% clean energy economy by 2050, while on the other hand, the market is simply not responding at a rate to make that possible, especially in the segments where it could matter the most. So let's take a quick look at why that is. Energy burden and energy insecurity have been part of the American energy story for a long time. Lower income households pay a higher percentage of their income for their energy. And even when they can make the payment today, they are always at risk of being unable to pay their future energy bills. And energy burden and insecurity is even more pronounced when we look at it through an equity lens. That's why we have federal programs to help cover energy upgrades based on demographics and income. And here I want to uplift research done by Dr. Tony Reams, who most recently served as the Principal Deputy Director for the Office of State and Community Energy Programs at the DOE, before leaving that post last year to return to the University of Michigan's School for Environment and Sustainability as Tishman Professor of Environmental Justice. That's a mouthful. His work highlighted the significant problem of the eligibility gap, right? So some families earn too much money to qualify for government assistance, but the same families earn too little to qualify for loans. Dr. Reams found that in Michigan alone, about 1 in 8 households fall into that gap. So if you think about it on a national scale, that means millions of households are not participating in the clean energy transition because they don't meet eligibility requirements for either public funding or private financing. And the problem is exacerbated by cash flow constraints in those homes. So in his keynote speech at the 2022 ACEEE Energy Efficiency Finance Forum, Dr. Reams shared that 31% of households in the US cut back on or skip food and meals and medicine because they're just managing their budget. 21% of American households are unable to pay their utility bills. 20% put up with unhealthy temperatures in their homes as a strategy to try to manage costs. Since 2013, the US Federal Reserve has done a survey on the economic well-being of American households, and they have consistently found that 30% of adults cannot meet a $400 cash emergency. Now consider that the DOE's own analysis finds that the average upfront cost per household for energy upgrades is $22,000. And that's even after accounting for all sorts of subsidies that can go as high as 50%. The numbers do not add up, right? The inconvenient truth is that paying for clean energy upgrades is a problem not just for low-income households, but for middle-income households as well. The majority of the country cannot afford what we need them to do. Another reason why market uptake of energy upgrades is as low as it is has to be attributed to insufficient government spending. Take the Weatherization Assistance Program, for example. It might sound impressive that WAP has helped 7 million households over 40 years, but one can also observe that Congress has underfunded the need every single year for decades. You know, again, Dr. Reams found that the federal funding for the program is 20 times less than what's needed to help all of the eligible households. To make a real difference and reach the 40 million eligible families, the weatherization program would need a budget of $17 billion a year for 15 years. The Biden administration's much celebrated bipartisan infrastructure law settled for $3.5 billion spread over 5 years. So yes, we need to celebrate that historically significant level of investment, but we also have to be, quite humble and honest in recognizing that it's only widening the gap in the later years, and it's going to leave millions without the support they need. I want to just point to California very quickly, where the cost of building decarbonization just for low and moderate income households, the cost to upgrade them is between $70 billion to $140 billion. And there's no sign that Congress or even progressive state legislators like California have sufficient political capital to support paying for that level of upgrades. So across the board, At federal and state levels, there's simply not enough political commitment to unlock the funding that's needed, and time isn't on our side. So while we would welcome adequate public spending, we can't afford to wait around, and that's why we're teaming up with community and industry champions to explore and elevate alternative solutions to move us forward. If we just look at the number of financial policies and instruments in the market, we might conclude that there are so many pathways to help people make the transition. But the reality is that there's some very strong gate filters that systematically exclude large numbers of people. To pass through the gate, you need to have a high enough income or a strong enough credit rating. And that systematically excludes a large percentage of the American population. In the next slide, you'll see the two charts. The chart on the left side of the screen is showing market penetration from 4 state clean energy loan programs. And after almost 20 years, those programs managed to celebrate reaching 0.1% of homes in each state. Let's think about that. 20 years to get to less than 1% of homes through these loan programs. The chart on the right is underscoring that those who do participate in these programs are the cream of the crop, as defined by their credit ratings. 75% or more of people willing to borrow loans to do energy upgrades in their homes have prime to super prime credit ratings. This is an equity issue. So to recap, before I pass it over to Holmes, all of the traditional financial policies and solutions have embedded in them significant barriers to achieving scale of uptake. And when we do see participation, then we're also seeing barriers to equitable access. So where do we go from here? For that, let me turn it over to Holmes to introduce the alternative that we champion at Clean Energy Works. Thank you.
Tamara, thank you. That was powerful and succinct. I saw a lot of heads nodding all the way to the back row. Some of you who had raised your hands from identifying as being from a place outside the United States, still recognizing some of these dynamics as part of the political economy of your place. Before we move forward, I'm going to step back just to this one bar chart, the last one that Tamara addressed. It's arresting. If I could find a cardiologist, I would tell them I'm having a heart attack. Now, I didn't say that to draw laughter, but maybe I can stave off some tears. Here's what you really need to see, even if you can't test your eyesight against this bar chart. It comes from the national labs. It tracks 4 high-capacity states: New York, Connecticut, a famous banking state and the first one with a green bank, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. It collected and analyzed all of their data for the first 10 years of operation. It showed also that whenever the subsidies to those banks stopped, so did their loan portfolios start to stall. Each one of them was saved at a different point in the 10 years and persists today. In none of those 4 cases, all of them with very well qualified people. These are not incompetent states and they are not understaffed organizations for what they needed to be testing. As Tamara pointed out, none of them were able to exceed 0.1% in a year. And I want to be emphatic about that because Tamara's remarks may have conflated the year versus the cumulative, but the cardiac arrest comes when you sum it all up and look and see that, in fact, none of them, after a decade, reached 1% of the households that were eligible for their products, the people who lived in their states. In fact, part of the problem is that they were finding a lot of people were not eligible, but they were under so much political pressure to show that the consumer debt option would work. How could they stop? How could they rest every morning out there marketing a loan product? And in order to hit the numbers that were even this high, 90% of the people they served had credit qualifications so good they could have had a McDonald's drive-through experience in the fintech economy and not needed a public policy to support their access to credit. Prime, super prime, and beyond even super prime. 90% of the loans that were actually closed in all 4 banks over 10 years. This is the data signal that is impossible to assail with outliers. We at Clean Energy Works have searched everywhere. We have gone to every state. We've gone to every city. We have asked everyone with data, do you have a data set that is different than this one? 10 years of searching. The implications of this data set, as I said, is arresting, especially because the Inflation Reduction Act redoubles on the strategy with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, with $20 billion arranged across 7 different live experiments run at a multi-billion-dollar scale. We fully expect to be able to partner with some of those award recipients, and I want to tell you more about how. But I'm hoping that I've really gripped your attention to realize how tender, how sensitive it is for us to take the economic policy that we think is responsive to the solution to a multi-billion-dollar scale in the face of data sets like this that took a tremendous amount of effort to produce and report. Tamara led me to pick up next then on where the Clean Energy Works team is finding light on the horizon. It's a concept called inclusive utility investments, a term coined and reiterated by the Environmental Protection Agency, which itself has been looking for financial solutions since it issued in the Obama administration the first edition of the Clean Energy Financing Toolkit for state and local decision makers. Inclusive utility investments is a financial solution that allows utilities to invest in all money-saving clean energy upgrades at any site it serves and recover those costs with a site-specific tariff-based charge on that utility customer's bill with a charge that is less than the estimated cost of those money-saving upgrades. I want to let that sink in. You can read the single sentence on the slide again. But what I want to emphasize is that this innovation airlifts our mental framework of economic solutions to people who are living with conditions of economic distress out of the financial services sector, which is where almost anyone would go to solve a financial problem. I've got a financial policy problem. I'm going to go to the financial services sector. What Clean Energy Works is reading into the data is that the financial services sector is governed by policymakers enforcing regulations that require systematic disqualification of people that would need to be served. And so actually airlifting that mental framework out of the financial services sector and into another part of the economy that is well equipped with economic regulators and a set of policy frames that are designed for universal service, you get a different set of instruments. Particularly, you get one that's called a tariff. A tariff, a sheet of paper that on 3 pages can be approved by state or government appointed officials on behalf of all consumers to stamp that the terms are just, reasonable, and fair for the utility to make a site-specific investment with site-specific cost recovery. The state itself, the government officials, review those 3 pages written in plain English and say, these terms are just, reasonable, and fair as we so declare on behalf of all people who would be served by this company in this jurisdiction, both now and in the future. This essentially eliminates the need for a credit-worthy counterparty because the utility is not actually making unsecured loans. That's why I'm giving you a comparison chart here. On the left-hand side would be the characteristics of unsecured consumer debt products. And on the right-hand side are the attributes of a site-specific investment with site-specific cost recovery for a utility that is underwriting each upgrade based on the cash flows from its savings, where the utility knows in advance this is a place where money is being wasted on wasted energy, or this is a place where the cash flows from following upgrades or their participation in our demand response program would be more than enough to pay for the smart thermostat or the smart EV charger. These consumer protections and consumer assurances, including things like the estimated annual savings must exceed the cost recovery charges, puts the customer who's there now and the customer in the future at that location in a cash flow positive position. This is also what eliminates the need to qualify each human being behind every door. Are they a refugee? Do they have a bankruptcy in their background? Who cares? Are they a renter? Who cares? If this is a location where money can be saved with the upgrades and the utility can make an offer to the person that allows that building to be upgraded for the upgrades to go in, then the transaction can close. Now, I want to take you through a movie next. I'm just going to flip. We've learned that we should flip screens here. That will take 3 or 4 minutes of your life. And I ask for your rapt attention. You will be transported to Eastern North Carolina. North Carolina is my home state. My family's for 10 generations. Someone here in the third row also. You'll be hearing from a community that is in what's called Down East North Carolina, Roanoke Electric. Roanoke Electric is an energy democracy. It's an electric cooperative, which means it's a nonprofit utility. They have never had ratepayer-funded energy efficiency programs to distract them from the pain of having skewed access to energy upgrades. And the leadership of Roanoke Electric is extraordinary and has an extraordinary story. It is one of the only electric cooperatives in the country led by people of color with a board that represents the proportion of its membership that's also from communities of color. And you'll be seeing and hearing from them as they attest to their experience implementing inclusive utility investments.
I had some issues with my heat and air. I knew it wasn't doing the job that it should do for the house. And I'm like a lot of other folks, credit's not the greatest in the world, couldn't afford to have it fixed, was worried about the age of the unit, when it was going to be playing out, because I keep it serviced, but wondering how much longer it was actually going to last. Light bills were running in the $500 range. Just one person in the house, it's kind of high. It was a major strain. Like I say, I'm here by myself. It's hard to pay the bills as it is, and then when you get a bill that's as high as that, it's detrimental. It scares you to death to start with, and then I usually have to have my bills extended anyway, so that's another $6 that's added onto it.
Our area here is one that really has not experienced any growth in well over 30 to 40 years. And so with that, obviously it does bring challenges in the fact that we do not have business and industry in this area that will generate wealth creating opportunities for families. And that presents a very unique challenge for us and our leadership team and other stakeholders here at Roanoke Electric.
My house wasn't getting as cool as I thought it should be. My electric bill was running around 300, high twos, maybe threes, some months. And I felt something needed to be done about that. If I could save a little bit here to use somewhere else, I would. I would love to do that.
The Upgrade to Save program provides energy efficiency upgrades that results in significantly lower energy bills for the member owners of co-ops.
An energy assessor, professional energy assessor, comes out to your home to go through all the cracks and crevices in your home and find out why exactly is your energy bill as high as it is. Once we have the results of that assessment in hand, we can then turn around and direct the service providers that work in the Upgrade to Save program to come out to your home and fix up those spots that we've identified. We can quantify the amount of savings that you're likely to get as a result.
I'm thinking that it probably will be well worth the savings of having everything fixed, maybe in the range of $1,600 a month.
Since I got the system, I have noticed that the temperature maintains better. They tighten up the whole house and surroundings, so it's holding its temperature a lot better. So the system ain't running as hard. My energy bill decreased for about
I'm not sure why my own screen stopped just then at 2 minutes and 40 seconds. But Tamara Jones, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes,
I see that there's something like 40 members of our party here on Zoom, and Tamara was reporting that they were not able to hear on Zoom, for which I sincerely apologize. Let me see if I can get this to reload for us. We may just have to forego the last minute of that movie if I can't get it to play. Hang on.
it's hard. My energy bill decreased for about $40 a month.
This is a program that is more inclusive for all member owners. We're breaking down many barriers and we're providing opportunities for more folks.
The most obvious benefit to the member who participates in Upgrade to Save is they save money. So when you get to actually save money and your home is more comfortable and your home is a little bit healthier, all of those things combined, it's a no-brainer.
Stop it right there. Thank you for the quality of the attention that I saw some of you in the back giving the video. These are voices that may never grace the gates of Harvard University. They have achieved so much. I want to call attention to the women in that movie, Tammy Agard, Laura Langhorne, unsung and under-recognized heroes of a clean energy transition that requires the insights of experience that they were willing to risk their careers to go and collect, produce data sets for, and report back to scholars and people who are thinking about propagating solutions where they can find indications of responsive solutions. In addition to the work of Tammy Agard, who is the founding president of a small business called Utility, which is a program operator for the implementation of inclusive utility investments, her company has been implementing a system called Pay As You Save that was architected by two men in Vermont, Harlan Lockman and Paul Silo, who provided the design to the Upgrade to Save program that you just heard the executives Marshall Cherry and Curtis Wynn describe. Curtis Wynn has gone on to lead a utility 20 times larger in Florida. He's also ascended to being the elected president of the board of all electric cooperatives for the entire industry. And in the state of North Carolina, the stakeholders who came to learn about their experience took it to the largest utility in the country, Duke Energy, and negotiated for the implementation of the same idea under the heading Improve and Save, which started this year, is available to the customers of Duke Energy with an unlimited quantity of upgrades that Duke is authorized to make, with a level playing field on the quality of returns for the investments that they can make through Improve and Save compared to anything else their investors could be offered to invest in. Now, let me finish the visual aids here that will bring us to discussion. We're right on time to land to a place where I'm counting on you to engage us. So if you haven't thought of the things that Tamara and I have provoked you to be curious about, we hope you'll give attention to that now. Here's a picture of the administrator of EPA, a person who, by the way, is from North Carolina and knew about Roanoke Electric's work in the 2010s. In the first 6 months of his role, he attended the Better Buildings Summit hosted by Secretary Jennifer Granholm, and at that White House summit, he called for more inclusive financial solutions for the money-saving energy upgrades that are marketed through programs like Energy Star Home Upgrade. It's no surprise then that the next year, the EPA, under the Energy Star brand, which is the most powerful brand in energy consumer markets in the United States, introduced a national resource hub for inclusive utility investment. In fact, it's the #1 search result for anyone who enters those terms. Now, over the course of time, between the year when Clean Energy Works was founded in 2013 on the left, that is coinciding with the year that I departed the Obama administration, to today, you can see the expansion of engagement. The patchwork quilt, for those of you in the very back who are not able to decipher the legend, goes from lighter shades to darker shades as a state progresses through the series of stage gates, starting from having an informal proceeding in the pale yellow to having a formal diligence proceeding underway, thinking about this from your public policy and governance terms, going from formal diligence to formal regulatory proceeding, and finally a final rule in the dark blue. Now, those dark blue states, they might surprise you. Weren't you looking for Oregon? Weren't you looking for New York? Where are all those famous blue states that would lead the way to an inclusive clean energy economy? It turns out that people who are at the front lines of economic distress and understanding that a separation, a stratification of the clean energy economy is unacceptable as a policy outcome have been our primary solutionaries. They have also produced an incredibly valuable data set. This one most recently released by the combination of Liberty Homes, led by Jill Ferguson and the late Stephen Bickel, with the founders of the Pay-As-You-Save system, Harlan Lockman and Paul Zillo. And the data that they reported was from all of the places that they knew. Every row of data here is from a utility that has experience, and what they were reporting was astonishing. One is that upwards of 80%, and in many cases upwards of 90% of the households would accept an offer of an upgrade for all money-saving clean energy upgrades at their site if the upfront cost was zero, if there was no co-payment required. This 9 out of 10 acceptance rate is an extremely significant statistical signal and stands in contrast with the marketing of consumer loans, where we were seeing 9 out of 10 people either rejected or decline, where the close rates were so low, as we saw earlier. They were also reporting over here in this far column the cost recovery rate for the utility, which was upwards of 99%. Even in areas that the federal government was recognizing for 3 decades of poverty rates exceeding 20%, which is the federal definition of persistence in poverty. Even in places where you could drive for an hour in any direction and not leave areas that are recognized for the federal government, by the federal government for persistent poverty, they were having extremely high cost recovery rates. So this leads us to our invitation to you, to discuss together the insights and the challenges that open the remaining lines of inquiry. Just because we can report to you these signals from the landscape, both the signals of an imperative to be more creative and generative than returning over and over again to instruments that have very well-tested results that show us they don't climb the mountain, to figuring out how they can be combined, what can be expanded upon, How can we take inspiration from the rural areas that actually, I should point out, are served by electric cooperatives that serve 90% of the counties that are experiencing persistent poverty in the United States? If those energy democracies are leading us to have new insights, how can we incorporate those into the policies that are being considered for climate action plans elsewhere? When we do see groups like those stakeholders in North Carolina bring one of the largest utilities in the country to the table to negotiate, and Duke Energy, like others before it, opens their investment window, they may find, and reliably they do, that a large number of the buildings that are occupied by people who are experiencing economic distress and have signals of it in their utility bills with high energy burden also are living in places that have lots of deferred maintenance. There's not enough capital there to buy the heat pump, but there's also not enough capital to fix the hole in the roof, the crack in the window, the seams under the door, the kinds of major repairs that may actually jeopardize the prospects of that building still serving its purpose within the period of the cost recovery for the utility. These are the things that actually the utility commissioners cannot allow a utility to capitalize because it would be imprudent. You would not want the utility to capitalize upgrades to buildings that might not actually be habitable during the period of cost recovery. So that brings us to this third area of discussion, the need for braiding, the rebates, and the tax credits, but also the affordable housing preservation funds, where an organization that may not think of themselves as working on clean energy upgrades can see themselves as central to the project, that if they put in $15,000 of home repairs, the utility come along with double that amount for the energy upgrades that can actually lower the bills and improve the quality of life and the cost of living for the people in those places that have needed attention for far too long. Tamara ended her own comments by talking about the challenge of operationalizing all 5 dimensions of equity, which we started with today. And that brings us to right relations with the people who need to be at the table for procedural equity to be achieved in the negotiation of the terms of investment that give us distributive equity outcomes. And finally, there are many more applications of site-specific investments in cost recovery than energy efficiency, though that is the origins of this project, the one that gives you the insights we're sharing with you now. But where else could it go? You may have seen virtual power plants popularized in the last few years, where flexible demand can make all the difference with integrating more renewable energy, not just here, worldwide. You may be thinking about rooftop solar and batteries as an important solution for dampening the demand for new central scale, even new gas peaker plants. And finally, EV chargers and all of the batteries that are interconnected to them, which means that two-way EV chargers pose a very interesting prospect for realizing more grid benefits that the utility can share with customers that accumulate those upgrades faster, can transform the grid in a way that is overall more affordable for everyone. So now, and pretty much right on time, I'm happy to be turning our time to you. Tamara and I have devoted ourselves with the benefit of our team members in preparing these remarks for an audience at Harvard because we believe in the commitment that you have to public policy and to some of the values that have centered our own pursuit and work. But we think that the data and the concepts that we brought you are uncommon and under-discussed. And we're hoping to be able to dedicate the last 25 minutes of our time together to that purpose. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Holmes and Tamara. I'll start with the first question. You gave the example first of co-ops that have a certain kind of business model, and then Duke Energy, a different kind of business model. They both operate in states that have various state policies and regulations that govern utilities. Help us understand a little bit more about how those state policies and regulations inform how you can partner with the co-ops, and what is it that is actually informing how Duke Energy, with a different business model, is interested in pursuing these kinds of investments, given they operate in a number of states, but given the kinds of state policies they operate under?
It's a wonderful question. I do have a visual aid, and I'm just daring enough to put it up there. On the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a little icon of people who are concerned about this problem and are willing to do something about it. And with some technical assistance, they can go right to their utility and say, have we got a deal for you? Our deal, our proposition to you, utility, is that you make site-specific investments that are money-saving for us on terms that are equal to anything else that you could invest in. For an electric cooperative, that might be for a not-for-profit basis, but it's not as if they don't have margins, and they do. Utilities that are operated as not-for-profit do have margins, and they can take that value proposition to their own governing board, or in the case of Duke Energy, to their statewide utility commission. And if the utility commission agrees that those terms are just, reasonable, and fair, or the elected board members of the cooperative do, then they vote to say yes and authorize that investment and move forward from there. In the case of North Carolina, I want to bring in the governor. Some of you work on politics that are outside of the electric power sector, and they matter. In this case, it actually turned out that Governor Roy Cooper was challenging his Department of Environmental Quality to develop a clean energy plan for the state. It was actually academics at the Nicholas Institute at Duke that knew about the work at Roanoke Electric and led the stakeholder process that led to a roadmap for the state of North Carolina that included inclusive utility investment, and commended it to the state agency, which included it in the governor's plan. And the governor's clean energy plan called for inclusive utility investment. Then during COVID, there was widespread arrearages, millions of people behind on their bills. This led to a multi-billion-dollar problem in the utility sector, and it led to a multi-state process that once again was facilitated by the Nicholas Institute. And the Nicholas Institute stakeholder process had a utility working group that included every major utility in the southern states, that for more than half a year tried to surface any idea they could get from anyone, anywhere. Bueller. They asked for financial solutions for how to deal with people who are especially experiencing energy burden and not able to pay their bills, and experiencing energy insecurity as a result. And the number one scoring result of all of the ideas that were assessed by their own criteria, that means Duke Energy's own criteria, was inclusive utility investment. They turned back around to the negotiating table and finished the deal with stakeholders led by the Southeast Environmental Law Center, which represented the North Carolina Justice Center in that case. These were legal negotiations about economic terms that led to a more inclusive clean energy economy. And it's still a work in progress, but I hope by giving you more dimensions than just a pat answer, you can see how often you will meet somebody who has an opportunity to participate in the project of achieving an inclusive utility investment outcome.
Can I add, if I could, Joe?
Yes, please, Tamara.
So I think it's important, I want through an equity lens to add a different dimension to this as well, which is that there's a significant difference between rural electrical cooperatives and investor-owned utilities. And one could observe, using the recognition equity analysis frame, is that too many cooperatives, electrical cooperatives, have been conducting themselves as if they're mini IOUs. They have forgotten the 7 principles that are supposed to define every cooperative in this country. They have walked away from democratic member control. They don't want members to actually show up at board meetings and participate. We've had lawsuits brought against co-ops in the South for, running the enterprise as though it were a fiefdom, rife with nepotism. They have limited member participation. They don't do education and training. They don't seek cooperation among cooperatives. That's a principle, and concern for community. So driving programs with maximal community benefits. These are things that IOUs are not at the center of an IOU business model, should be at the center of cooperative business model. And yet today we're having to see massive organizing effort being put out to return cooperatives back to their foundational principles. And we've been lucky in that some of our early adopters have been led by folks in Roanoke and other places, leadership that have demonstrated a commitment to be in alignment with those principles.
Great. Thank you, Tamara. Let me now turn over to questions from the audience. As a reminder, a question ends with a question mark. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I have two questions, if you don't mind. This is really cool work. My first question is, I'm really curious how the site-specific part of this tariff works, because the video showed that you do calculate based on like a per household basis how their energy bill could be shifted by the addition of these improvements. And obviously, you know, the area that a cooperative covers is very different from that of an IOU, as you mentioned. And so I'm really curious how, like for some of the larger utilities, how the site-specific stuff would work. And then I can give you my second question as well directly. I'm also curious from the data that you've collected on the implementation of this program in some places, how the energy burden of the consumers has shifted pre and post the implementation of this program, because you mentioned this as a fixed charge, right, on the bill? Okay, yeah. So I'm just really curious how the energy burden has shifted.
Mm-hmm. Those are excellent questions. The first one I think I want to take swiftly and then maybe even take offline, which is to say, in the United States, we have almost universal service. I want to recognize indigenous peoples on reserved lands that are still not well served to this day. But for the most part, there is universal connectivity to the grid. And every single place there is a connection to a customer, there is a commercial account. And the commercial account already exists. So the utility is able to associate amount of capital to that location, which has an entry in their own database that allows them to also track cost recovery from that location. Now, the site-specific charge is unique to that location because it's proportional to whatever was done to upgrade that location. The combination of things might be heat pumps, it might be smart thermostats, it could be, in some cases, EV chargers. And the cost recovery charge in the case of Duke is 90% of the estimated savings. In other places, it's 80% of the estimated savings. And that delta is designed to assure that the customer is not worse off for having taken on the upgrades. But I want to acknowledge that the amount that is in the free cash flow component there is small until the costs are recovered. But what it does do, especially if you're getting upgrades that are sensitive to weather, like the heat pump for your two-way air conditioner, which also serves as your heat pump in the winter, these can actually stave off the worst bills. The most dangerous bills are the spiking high bills in July and August, or in January and February. So when those upgrades go in, the volatility in the monthly bill can dampen, and that is actually one of the most important improvements to the jeopardy of energy burden. But it is true that the customer at that location does not enjoy the benefits of all of the money savings until the utility has recovered its costs. I hope I've answered both of your questions. Great. Let's move on.
Great stuff. I am interested in the politics of this. Why did we end up with the GGRF as the tool if you don't think it's the adequate tool? You know, and what are the politics in the shift that you're asking for?
Tamara's nodding, and both of us were called in by some of the people that were lobbying on that legislative language for months before its passage. And we reported some of the same data and some of the same insight to the same individuals. Tamara, do you have a comment before I field a response? Okay. We may have lost, you might be on mute.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, why don't you start? I know.
So first of all, my career in public service started with a Congressional Science Fellowship on Capitol Hill when Governor Jay Inslee was then congressional member Jay Inslee. And one of the pieces of policy that I attended with James Bradbury was the development of a Clean Energy Deployment Administration, which was the first of its kind as a legislative concept in that session. I've been working on green bank concepts that long. And at the Department of Energy, I led the finance working group across all program offices to endeavor to induce states to offer green bank-backed solutions, just like the kind that you saw us share the data for. I am the most astonished and deeply humbled person to face the data about the market response. And I've been very motivated to deeply understand it, which is why we reflect back some of these underlying conditions and what kind of principled responses to it we may have now. The 7 awardees of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, each and every one of them have an opportunity to introduce inclusive utility investments as part of their portfolio. Some of them might, some of them might not. But Clean Energy Works is already prepared to engage any one of the 7 with 3 types of financial instruments that can easily be adopted when and if they do turn to the economic regulators of the utility sector to complement what they are doing with the financial services sector and the regulators of consumer loans. Those are a lower cost of capital, a utility reserve fund or a utility assurance fund for cost recovery, and a participant assurance fund to underscore the commitment to consumer assurances and a do no harm attitude towards those that would participate in the inclusive utility investments that are offered. Those 3 instruments should mitigate the risk exposure that anyone who is uncertain about venturing into this field could have. And there's certainly enough money in each one of the awards for any one of them to find a utility partner and move forward. We're already talking to a couple that may do exactly that.
The language I would add to that is simply that we are where we are because it takes a lot of effort to get the paradigm shift that is represented in the work that we do. You know, when folks are convinced that the earth is flat and they can see the sun going from across the sky, and then we come and try to tell them that we might actually be on a ball, it takes a while for people to kind of get their heads around that and understand the data and get comfortable. We operate in a system where our market framework and the prevalence of loans as the solution is so dominant that it takes ongoing and just sustained effort to begin to break that apart. So the question of how are we, here with greenhouse gas reduction funds, given this data is not enough to begin turning the Titanic. It continues to take effort at particular leverage points. So I'll stop there, and if there are more, we can follow up. But just recognize that this is a paradigm shift that we're asking the industry to make.
Before I take this next question, I want to say there's never been a place where inclusive utility investments are offered that loans aren't also there and present. These are compatible and coexistent solutions. They are not mutually exclusive, and in some cases, they are interdependent. So please accept that the field data that we are sharing with you from field practitioners is not sending a message that there's no place that loans work, but that for the people that may be the most sensitive to inclusion, and at every economic segment of the market are underserved or underparticipating, we may be able to have an opportunity to add a solution that with a 90% opt-in rate where places have money-saving upgrades can transform the politics of support for a clean energy economy. So we're looking for a both and, not an either or.
Tamara and Holmes, thank you so much for this session. I'm Yiqi, first-year MPP student at Harvard Kennedy School. I found this session particularly inspiring because I'm also deeply committed to advancing equitable clean energy transition, especially in developing countries. So here are my two questions. The first question is that could you give us a flavor of the challenges facing this program so far in its implementation? And the second question is about looking ahead. How likely is it for this innovative model, inclusive utility investment, to be transferred into developing countries? What are the possible challenges lying ahead? Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. I want to acknowledge the Energy Efficiency Services Limited Corporation, which is a public-private venture in India. The first $100 million of inclusive utility investments were offered by them. The ESOL, as it's called, deployed, it was actually $150 million for LED light bulbs. And the price of the upgrade was $1.50. What's different about what's being tried in the United States is that it's 4 orders of magnitude larger of investment per site. But what we saw and what we learned from the Energy Efficiency Services Limited offering a product, a financial solution that they called pay as you save at that time, was that they were able to move 100 million objects into the economy in places that might not otherwise have been served, and 10% of them accepted the offer on the tariffed terms. So this was actually one of the earliest signals in the field that it's an idea worth trying, and inspired redoubling efforts in the United States. We have also seen that groups like SMAP, the electric sector's analyst team at the World Bank, have had great interest. And the Transforming Transportation Conference at the World Bank has also had an interest in applying some of these same concepts to the products like electric buses and transit buses, which account for the largest majority of vehicle miles traveled in many urban areas in developing countries. And we haven't actually seen uptake on the transportation side for transit buses, but the Clean Energy Works team has been focused on trying to bring in another heavy-duty vehicle fleet, which is the electric school buses, through the electric school bus program, where EPA has offered $5 and $6 billion of vouchers for clean electric school buses, but the school districts are still balking at getting their third and fourth bus. They'll get the first 1 and 2 free, sure, but how are they going to buy the rest of them? We're working at that intersection as well. I think we welcome a conversation with you and all of you, including those 24 folks that are still on the Zoom screen, to be with us in a conversation about how to take concepts of economic inclusion into the clean energy economy in all of the jurisdictions around the world where there is already an authority that holds to account a utility that offers services on terms that must be deemed to be just, reasonable, and fair. If that architecture exists, then it is possible to blanket authorize all money-saving upgrades on a site-specific basis with a very approachable set of technologies. Thank you for bringing us.
Yeah, if I could add to that, just a couple of additional things. It's a great question. It's a whole seminar that we could do. On the equity side, there is an increasing explicit commitment to drive or center equity on the part of regulators and even some utilities. There's a rush to do distributional equity and a increasing appreciation for procedural. So we've got to hear from the community. We have lots of listening sessions. And that's about as far as it goes. So one of the challenges that we see in practice is that we've got institutions that have played a very large role in creating the conditions, the problems that we're trying to solve. Those institutions, largely still ignorant of the history, their own histories and roles, trying to lead the solutions and not understanding why they are sometimes encountering resistance and communities walking away and a lack of trust. So one of the challenges is really to try to get our policymakers and institutional leaders and practitioners to do the work of operationalizing, of understanding how equity makes a difference in how they are actually doing their work. And in terms of the Global South and applications, we, for several years, had a member of our team who was working in the Global South, bringing this approach to transit and really trying to see how far we could extend this in that setting. And Holmes, I'm sure that you could say a lot more in terms of the specifics, but what I will say is that the differences in the institutional arrangements across countries really matter. So I think that I would say comfortably that the underlying logic, set of questions and values are very much transferable. And we continue to work with some international partners in providing technical assistance and guidance as they're trying to engage around some of this approach. But that you have to be exquisitely sensitive to the political landscape and just not assume in any kind of imperialist manner that what works for us here in the American context applies in other countries as well. But the underlying logic and framework, I would argue, as someone who grew up in the Global South in Jamaica, very much see this as in alignment.
Hi, thank you for this. It was very informative. I am from Oregon, and I appreciated you calling out that we were not a dark blue state on the map. And I was most recently living in Washington. And so I'm curious, what you see as the institutional or political or stakeholder, whatever they are, barriers to why this has not been implemented in more of those states that you listed as the leading blue clean energy forward states?
That's a great question. And it might be one of our last. Joe, we're out of time? Yeah.
I may have one more depending on.
All right. Well, we'll be brief about this. I'll tell you, Oregon and Washington have unjustly been underattended because they have a very clean electric power supply. So in the grand scheme of things, our organization has focused on places that have more carbon intensive power supplies than them. But that still does not explain why, some of the folks that we know by name in those states haven't come forward to address the similar solutions. And the answer is we don't know. We really don't know. But I had the privilege and pleasure of speaking to the governor of Oregon just about 8 weeks ago. And she said right to my face, I don't know why we don't have inclusive financial solutions, but I just reappointed Lisa Tawney, who I think is the most talented commissioner to grace the Oregon Commission, and we should talk about this soon. Now, I'm quoting a short conversation with the governor just as an affirmation that we don't think that there's opposition. But it is incumbent upon all of us to find the resources to provide the capacity and the assistance to give people more confidence that they can get through the stage gates of know-how to introduce inclusive financial solutions where they're needed everywhere.
So let me close with a final question about performance evaluation. We know from research of similar kinds of programs like weatherization programs that in practice, we're not realizing all of the projected cost savings and energy savings, which has implications for being able to meet that test that you described earlier, that the cost savings here are going to justify the tariff. And the tariff may be, if I recall correctly, Holmes, either 80% or 90%, depending on whether it's a co-op or Duke Energy, of those projected savings. And some of this gets to the labor challenge we have with growing out the clean energy economy. We don't have enough electricians to install heat pumps right now. We have a bunch of people who are kind of new getting into this business. Some of the research that's looked at why we fall short, say on weatherization, it turns out that contractors vary in quality, which anyone who's ever worked with contractors renovating their home recognize that some contractors are better than others, right? So how do we think about in terms of being able to demonstrate that, hey, we've got a workforce able to deliver on these retrofits, that we're able to make a compelling evidence-based case to the people who are signing up for this program that, no, really, you are going to realize these cost savings. What kind of system of performance evaluation do you have right now to really demonstrate that these cost savings are exceeding those upfront costs that are associated, that are the basis for the tariff and associated with the retrofits that are undertaken here?
Tamara, you mind if I take this one? Yeah. So a couple quick things. One is that the utilities themselves have networks of qualified contractors to work with. You can't just be a contractor and roll up on a utility. And it turns out that the utility has much more leverage over those contractors than any single household. That the quality of work that they do and perform can be held to account at a higher standard with more rigor when the utility is the customer than when grandma is the customer. So that is actually a form of consumer assurance. However, the possibility that the estimates of the savings, approved by the utility as they must be, could ultimately not track to the household's reality because of things like changing in occupancy in the house or other types of changes that were unanticipated. We found that there was one utility in Tennessee where the utility detected that the savings weren't there, and when they inspected, it was because their own contractor had miswired or misplumbed the heat pump. And they were glad for their performance evaluation because they were able to detect the work quality issue, get the correction done, and put the program back on path. This is a level of rigor that individual households really rarely achieve. Now, there is an area of innovation we're excited about in the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Community Choice Aggregator. It's called a CCA. And they are proposing that the cost recovery charge be modified in year 3 based on the measured performance in the first 2 years. This essentially relieves the liability of having to be right with an estimate that can span a decade or more, and instead just use that estimate for the first 24 months until you have sufficient data, at which point you can actually adjust that charge to match what the actuarial science is showing you about that site. This is an experiment that the state of California has more or less ordered for the utilities to proceed with, starting with a program that Silicon Valley Clean Energy has had in the public record for a couple of years now, and I encourage any of you who are curious about it. But these are the types of things that we welcome you into, this generative, creative space at the leading edges of what's known about a novel solution that nevertheless has been under development for a generation and still has room for improvement.
Great. So before we wrap up, let me remind you that next Monday is a university holiday for Veterans Day. So we will reconvene in 2 weeks' time in the same place. We'll be hosting Kyle Ming, who is a professor at UC Santa Barbara and recently served as a senior economist at the Council of Economic Advisors. He will be speaking on the future of U.S. climate policy, remarks that I suspect he starts writing on Wednesday. Finally, I'm glad someone enjoyed that. Finally, please join me in thanking Holmes and Tamara for their insights and their service. That was great. Thank you guys so much.
It is an honor to work with Tamara Jones. And Joe, thank you so much for welcoming us to Harvard. Thank you, Tamara, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Holmes. Thank you, everyone.